really good turnout, and was not expecting as many folks. So thank you all for being with us here in the middle of the day. And thank you to the dignitaries and other elected officials that showed up as well. This is really important, and it's an important topic. You know, the Supreme Court said that the right to vote is preservative of all other rights, and I think that it speaks to that concept by having you all here. I also see other election officials from neighboring communities and other communities. Thank you for the support. And I see some poll workers in the room as well. So we've got a lot of folks who have a lot of knowledge about the elections process, and I'm really grateful for that. Like Carrie said, I was elected in 2016, which was an interesting time to be elected. An interesting time to get into the elections business. I did work, however, prior to 2016 in the absent voter counting board under the previous clerk, Terry Bennett, who had been the clerk since 1996. So she had served in that capacity for well over 20 years. And she had asked me to chair the absent voter counting board in 2010 because she was a Republican election official and I was a well-known Democrat in the community. And I was excited to learn how the process worked. I was excited to learn from somebody who had such a great reputation, both bipartisanly, from folks on both sides of the aisle. And what's cool about that is in 2016, at that time, absentee ballots at that time skewed more conservative from a partisan standpoint than they do today. And that's because of the rules and the process and how people vote. And I remember in 2016 going to bed that night not knowing if I was going to be elected clerk, because it was a very close race. And every time the absentee ballots would come in, my lead would go slower, would get lower and lower and lower. And I went to bed that night feeling very confident, not in the outcome of the election, because I had no idea. I had no idea if I was going to wake up the winner or I was going to wake up the loser. But the clerk's office was inundated with 3 times as many absentee ballots that they had ever handled before. And they were counting until 7 in the morning. And I had no idea what was going to happen. And I started with a lead of 1,000 and kept getting smaller. But I went to bed and slept soundly. Because I knew, not just that I trusted Terry Bennett, even though she had endorsed my opponent. That didn't matter to me. I trusted the process. I knew who was in the room. I understood every intricate part of that process because I had chaired that absentee voter counting board before. And I had faith in the process. And in the end, obviously I'm standing before you today. I was victorious in that election. My life would have been okay either way. But more importantly, I accepted that. And I went to bed knowing that. And what's cool about this event is hopefully all of you have that same feeling when you walk out this door. Because 2016 itself was not without controversy. Foreign actors tried to compromise our voter registration rolls in various states. 2020 was obviously a very controversial election. And what is typical is that when people's team lose, you almost always invariably see a drop in the faith in elections. It's a natural consequence that's happened since they've been documented. What we've never seen since 2020 was a plunge in that support at such a high level. To see support in the outcome of an election drop 24% in some surveys, amongst partisans specifically. That in and of itself was something brand new. And then everything since 2024 has been centered around that. A lot of my life has been centered around that. And so what's cool about this is, again, I can obviously talk to you about the voter registration system, about list maintenance. We can talk about election security. And I like to talk about security being a spectrum. On one side, you have that security. You have that notion of one person, one vote. Everybody who votes is a qualified registered voter. They are a citizen of the United States. They are 18 years old, and they reside in their community for at least 30 days. That they have a secret, private ballot. And that in and of itself is the central, most important factor. On the other side of that spectrum, you have access. It's the same coin. There's two sides of the same coin. That everybody has access to the ballot and can vote and cast that ballot in a way that is meaningful and relevant and accessible to their life. If they have a disability, they have access to the equipment that can allow them to do that. If they have an inability to get to election day, they have the ability to vote an absentee ballot. And in that process, we're not going to give that ballot to somebody else. Now in Michigan, they have 9 days of early voting. We'll be doing 14 days of early voting here in November. It's an overachiever. No, because my staff hates me. That's why we're doing it at Valley County and the Secretary of State's office is frustrated with me for that. But no, it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be in elections because options have increased. And because there's been a break in the dialogue, and people are willing and interested in having real conversations about the process. It's not as much screaming. There's less accusations. There's less Freedom of Information Act requests for information that I legally can't give out anyway, and that will not prove what people are looking for. And that's been really helpful, and it's encouraging. Because again, while this is a very difficult and challenging time to run elections, to meet the challenge the voters gave us with two pretty robust ballot proposals and that implementing language, we are like a lab of democracy. And it's fantastic. And so to that end, I will close my remarks and I will be here for some questions. We do have a hard stop, so I will give it to the next, I'll give it back to Carrie, and we'll give it to the next speaker. Thank you.
Next, we have Dana Nessel, who's a former criminal prosecutor and civil rights attorney. Dana Nessel was sworn in as Michigan's Attorney General in January 2019. Each election, the Michigan Department of the Attorney General works to ensure that every vote is counted and the will of the voters is upheld. In the rare instances where voter fraud does occur, the department prosecutes offenses against our democracy to their fullest extent. Here to tell us more about her department's efforts to bolster civic engagement and protect the elections process, please welcome Attorney General Dana Nessel.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We do have a number of dignitaries here, but I want to especially thank our legislators, Debbie Dingell from the 6th Congressional District, and then in our state legislature, we have Senator Dana Polanyi and our state representative here, Ranji Puri. So thank you to the three of you, and why it's especially important to have them here is because they are the ones who make the laws. And in many instances, when we see that the laws are insufficient for some reason or another, and we have to change the law or amend the law in order to better protect our democracy, they do that. And they've done that many times over the course of their careers, and have done so even recently to address shortcomings. And so we need to be in a place where, on one hand, we have so many assurances and guarantees of safety and security in our elections, but it doesn't mean that we can't always do better. And when we notice that there is an issue, we can simply change the law to ensure that there are greater protections. Now, I want to talk about the state of Michigan for a second. I think we have some national media here. And I think it's really important that people understand truly what a purple state we are, right? And just going through the course of the last many governors of our state, right? We had Bill Milliken, who was a Republican, followed by Jim Blanchard, who was a Democrat, followed by John Engler, who was a Republican, followed by Jennifer Granholm, who was a Democrat, followed by Rick Snyder, a Republican, and now we have Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat in office. And I say that to you because I don't remember anybody ever questioning the validity of any of those elections, even though I think we could all argue that there was, say, a big difference between John Engler and Jennifer Granholm, and yet we still voted them both into office. Same thing with Rick Snyder and Gretchen Whitmer, very different office holders, and yet we all agreed that they were, they were the winner of their respective elections. And so it goes in the state of Michigan. You never know what's going to happen here. But, you know, we have for many years accepted the fact that we go back and forth, and every election, it could either be a Republican or a Democrat who gets elected to the highest state office that we have in Michigan. Now, my role as Attorney General of this state, it's not my job to pick winners and losers of elections, but it is my job to ensure that our elections are safe, and it is my job to make sure that I am defending the will of the voters, whatever that may be. So here are some things that we do at the Department of Attorney General. First of all, we coordinate with law enforcement at all different levels, and that means coordinating with law enforcement at the local level, county level, at the state level, and also we work with federal authorities as well. And what we're doing at each and every election is we are working together to make sure, first of all, that each law enforcement agency knows, first of all, what the law is, and secondly, how they should handle a number of different situations should they arise. And I think it's important to know that, you know, we don't have the police there in the polling precinct with us, right? They aren't standing next to us as we are voting, and many people don't want them there directly with us as we're voting. But do we want them on standby in case there is a set of circumstances where we need their assistance? Yes, and that is what often occurs. And we do tabletop exercises each and every election so that we are trying to anticipate any set of circumstances that might arise to make sure that we are, again, we're protecting election workers, we're protecting voters, and we're protecting the community at large. There are some things I think that it's important that people know and understand about the safety and security of our elections. And that is sort of just the multiple layers that we have to ensure that our elections are accurate. Remembering that for the entire state of Michigan, we use paper ballots. And why is that important? Because if there is a dispute, those paper ballots are still there and can be recounted. We have, again, reviews that are conducted first by the local clerks, and a canvassing is done there. Then it gets passed on to the county, and a canvassing is performed there. Then it goes to the state, same thing. And then, you know, before there is certification, there are a number of different things that can occur. You can ask for recounts. If you believe that for whatever reason the votes were totaled incorrectly, of course we have lawsuits, more and more and more of them that are filed. But if you think that there is a reason why there has been an inaccuracy or some sort of issue, you can file a lawsuit. And then of course we have so many audits that are performed. And you know, in 2022, 200 audits were performed all over the state of Michigan. In 2020, it was 250 audits. And remembering that even in situations where it appeared as though there was some sort of error that took place, and I'm going to use Antrim County as the example that everybody knows about, where there was a change to the ballots sort of last minute. The Antrim County clerk failed to upload something in the software to reflect that change. There was, you know, clearly some sort of an issue that took place in terms of the votes that was very, very, very quickly corrected. But then later, there was a hand tally, a hand recount of those paper ballots, and it turned out that the results that were in short order corrected to were exactly the same as the paper ballots within, again, one or two ballots. And so that's how you know, accurate voting is. And those are all the different ways that we can ensure the accuracy of our elections. We have some, I would say one of the biggest issues that we have, that we see as of late, involves misinformation and disinformation that is out there about our elections. And there are a few things that have changed, and in fact, our state lawmakers have ensured that in the event of artificial intelligence, where a bad faith actor is using AI to change what an individual apparently is saying or doing, that is a crime. But I think it's important to know that if you are attempting to deter an individual from voting, and I'm not talking about like, oh, all these candidates are terrible, don't vote for anyone. But I'm talking about very specifically when you put out disinformation about the time, place, and manner of voting so that a person misses out, potentially, on their fundamental right to vote, that is a crime. And that has been upheld by our state Supreme Court recently. What does that mean, for instance? That's not, maybe exaggerating how or misrepresenting how a candidate feels about a particular issue, or a ballot proposal and saying that it does one thing or maybe it does another. It's really saying, hey, there's been a flood at Canton Precinct 3, and so it's closed, and you can't vote there, so don't bother showing up to vote. That is the type of thing that we're talking about. And the other example I would use is a case that is still pending right now in the courts that involved a couple of political operatives that made robocalls to over 10,000 Detroit residents to say, hey, if you vote absentee, that information is going to be passed along to law enforcement, and if you have an outstanding warrant, they're going to come and arrest you. I think we would all agree that that is something that is done just to deter people from voting absentee, and that is the kind of thing that would be a crime. But it is important to know that where we see, and let me say this, in terms of trying to undermine an election by engaging in an act that is illegal, it doesn't happen very often. But when it does, because of all the mechanisms that we have in place to catch any kind of election fraud, we vigorously investigate that, and when there's evidence to do so, we prosecute it, even though it happens very infrequently. And what I'm gonna compare it to is bank robberies. We also prosecute bank robberies. They don't happen very often. And when they do, we almost certainly catch the person because there's so many different ways to catch a person who's trying to rob a bank, right? We have surveillance cameras all over the place. We have that exploding red dye that goes into any bag that would be turned over. We have so many different ways to ensure that banks aren't robbed. Rarely, if they are, we nearly always catch them. That's how I would compare election fraud. I'm not going to say that no one ever tries it, but when they do, we catch them and we prosecute them. So we do have a handful of cases since I've been in office now. It's been about 6 years. We have received referrals from the Michigan Department of State on, like I said, a handful of cases. Some of them are cases where a person applied for an absentee ballot in another person's name. Now, I believe all of these, or nearly all of these, were family members who applied in the name of, generally speaking, it's their adult child. A form was sent to their house, they filled it out in their adult child's name, and then later on, they would say, well, I thought they might be here and they might want to vote absentee, and if they were, I wanted to preserve their opportunity to do it. Still prosecuted them. Said that's not a good enough excuse. It's illegal every time, and you're going to be held accountable for it. Doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, we catch them and we prosecute them. Efforts to double vote. Exactly the same thing. It rarely happens, but when it does, there is an easy mechanism to catch a person, and then they get prosecuted. And we have had a handful of cases where people have said to us, hey, I'm 78 years old. I didn't remember that I sent in my absentee ballot, but of course something flashes up on the screen for the election workers saying they'd already voted, and they try to cast their ballot. We prosecute them. Again, it doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, those individuals get prosecuted. I know there's been a lot of talk about non-citizens voting, so we went through all of our files at the Department of Attorney General. We did find one instance from the 2018 election where a Canadian citizen tried to vote, and we were able to detect it in the system, and we prosecuted her. So I'm not going to say it never happens, but I am going to say it happens with very little frequency, and when it does, we are aggressive about investigating and prosecuting those cases. So with that, I would just say that I look forward to questions that everyone has. I think it's incredibly important because of all the misinformation and because of all the disinformation out there. It is incredibly important that we are making the time to answer all your questions. And I hate to say, like, no question is a stupid question or no question is a bad question, but I really truly believe that to be the case when it comes to any kind of election-related questions, because it's important that you have faith and confidence in the safety, the security, and the accuracy of our elections. And let me say, the very best thing you could do if you do have any questions, besides having us answer those questions here today, is to sign up to be an election worker and go through the training. And for the people who have their doubts and have their concerns, almost all of them, even the biggest election deniers out there, once they go to the training, they say, wow, there are so many layers of protection. I had no idea. I now have complete confidence in our system of elections, so I welcome you to do that. But with that, pass it along to the next speaker.
Our next speaker, Agogo Riv, currently serves as Michigan's Deputy Secretary of State. Before Secretary Benson appointed him in March 2023, he was the Michigan State Director of All Voting is Local. Agobi has played a crucial role for more than a decade in protecting voters through his advocacy for ballot drop boxes, early voting, increased funding for clerks, and protection for election workers. During the 2022 election cycle, he served on the drafting committee for the Successful Voting Rights Proposal 2 ballot initiative, which amended Michigan's Constitution. A Detroit native, he has a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Michigan and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Michigan Law School. Please welcome the Deputy Secretary of State.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you today. My name is Agogo Davier, and I'm the Deputy Secretary of State. I want to thank Michael for bringing us all here today, along with my Attorney General, who spearheaded this whole entire effort. And of course, the League of Women Voters, who are indispensable, really, to our whole entire electoral process. I remember when I started voting, I would always look at the voting guides, and sometimes still do, still take a peek to kind of decide how I'm going to vote. I want to thank our distinguished guests here today, especially our legislators, and just really look forward to this conversation that we're going to have. I'm standing here and I realized as I was sitting down getting ready to get up that this will be my 8th election where I'm protecting voters in some capacity. I started off as a poll challenger, just making sure that polling locations were open on time and that voters knew where they should go to cast their ballots. But obviously, over the last dozens of years, we've had the challenges that face so many voters change. And as I approached 2020, thinking about how I would do my duty as an American citizen that year, I thought a lot about a story that my mom taught me when I was young. As those of you might have guessed at this point, even though I was born and raised in Michigan, my parents are immigrants from Nigeria. And my mom, in particular, told me when she was young that when she was 19, they had the first presidential election in Nigeria. And
the country has a really fragile democracy. And she stood in this long line that was just, from what I was told, it gets longer every year, she tells us. First it was 2 hours, it was 3. It's going to keep getting, eventually it's going to be like 12-hour long. But eventually she got a little frustrated and she wanted to leave the line. And she was with her dad, and her dad said, no, we have a civic duty to our country, to democracy itself, to be in this line, to cast our ballot. And really, democracy and voting is a team effort, and we all have a responsibility to join together to get things done. And so that inspired me to go and join All Voting is Local, and work within the pandemic to advocate for new drop boxes, to advocate for MichiganDropbox.com so people could find their drop boxes in their community. But after that election, which was extremely contentious, as we all know, on January 6th, it was pretty obvious to me and many other advocates that we still had a lot of work to do. And one thing I'll point out, we had 60% of people vote absentee in 2020. But we still had 40% in the pandemic who really wanted to go to a polling location and see their ballot go in and tag it. And it is important for all of us as election administrators to have a system that works for everyone. And that's why we spearheaded Proposal 2 with 9 days of early voting. And the one great innovation that I love is that you can get your absentee ballot, fill it out, go to your early vote location, and put it straight in the tag area. Completely brings together two really wonderful tools of voting. We also, within that proposal, have ballot tracking so that you can know where your absentee ballot is, when it's being mailed to you, when it's being returned, and that it's been accepted by your local clerk. We put in procedures for auditing. You have audits at the precinct level for election day. You have audits of the absentee ballot process. You have audits of the early vote process. And you also have something called a risk limiting audit. So we take a race and we look at the margin and we determine how many votes do we need to hand count to ensure that the margin is actually as it was reported. So we've done a lot of really good work to get the system ready. And one of the things that we also worked on in the lead up to February when we launched early voting for the first time statewide in the state was developing a new early voting poll vote tool, which ensures that you can only vote once when you early vote, which is extremely critical for our security. But within the department, we've also made sure that we take steps to ensure that only eligible voters are on our rolls and are voting. 80% of voter registration transactions take place with the department, either at a branch, online, through the mail. It comes through our office. And when you're getting your driver's license or state ID for the first time, you have to provide documentation about your legal status. So if you provide documentation that shows that you're not a U.S. citizen, you're not even allowed to register. It's automatic and it's strictly in place. And we also audit that process occasionally to make sure no one has accidentally slipped through. We've, in the lead up to this election after 2022, implemented a number of rules to ensure that the review of signatures on your application to vote absentee and on your absentee ballot envelope are consistently reviewed by clerks and their staff all across the state. We're working extremely hard with Michael and his fellow clerks at the municipal level and county level to ensure that we have a really safe election this year. We're really confident about our processes to get this done. But ultimately, as I said before, this is a team effort. And if you want to be in this team effort with us, I really encourage you to sign up to be a poll worker by going to democracy, by going to michigan.gov/democracy-MVP. Because even if there are enough poll workers in this community, and Michael always is telling me about all the hard work he does to publicize in the Canton Daily. I know you guys get this publication. And all the hard work he does and his team does to get poll workers, but there are so many other communities around the state who need help too. And so if you could sign up there at michigan.gov/democracy-MVP, I would truly appreciate it. I know the Secretary would as well. And together we're going to make this truly a successful election. So thank you so much.
If you have a question that you want asked, write it down on the card, hold your hand up, and one of the other league members will come and collect it. Panel, do you want to stay seated and I'll read the question to you, or do you prefer to come up to the mic? I can pass the mic. I'll pass the mic to you. While we're collecting questions, I want to remind you that the League of Women Voters puts out 2 forms of voter guides. One is the online vote411.org. You type in your address, and up pops your ballot, and responses that leaders have answered questions that we sent them. The other one is our ever-popular paper guide that we will be delivering the end of September, early October to 13 libraries throughout our district. That too will have every election, both statewide, national-wide, and our local elections, so that you can sit and peruse it. The League has been doing election advocacy work, voter education for 104 years, and we're not stopping now. So think of the League of Women Voters for non-biased, non-partisan election information. Okay, first question goes to the Secretary of State's office. When will the clerk's office be able to order the I vote voted stickers? Inquiring minds want to know.
Did you put someone on your team up to this? We also have the Livonia Clerk's Office here today. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. My understanding is that they are available or should be available this week. So, but I will check in with Sarah Reinhardt, who is our great director of external and get back to you.
My clerk would like to know if we can get extra stickers of the cat one. So, just if there's a way to do that, just let us know.
I have a family in the States that want
When I worked the last election, the most popular sticker was future voter. All the children that came in got a sticker. When the League registers people to vote, we have stickers that say, I registered to vote. The next question is for the Attorney General. Residents are receiving multiple messages suggesting they are not registered to vote, both by text and mail letters. Is there something being done about this purposeful misinformation?
Yeah, so we haven't, first of all, that's happened to me, so I know that it's happening. But we've not received a referral from an investigation from the Michigan Department of State, and I don't know if that's something that you guys are looking into, but I would say the most important thing people can do then is just to check to make sure that they are registered. You might already know that you are. I don't like the fact that there are those out there who are questioning whether or not somebody is registered. But a lot of times I think they might be operating off of bad information, and they really are just trying to ensure that each and every person is registering to vote so that they are an eligible voter. So I don't really know what type of legal infraction that would be if they're operating in good faith. But I would just recommend, again, that if anybody questions whether or not they are registered, that they double check, and they can do that with the Department of State, or they can do that with their local clerk. I don't know if you guys have anything more to say on that.
Yes. So if you want to check your registration, you can go to michigan.gov/vote and check your that you're registered there. Also, if there are any issues that you see out in the community in terms of misinformation or disinformation, I encourage you to email us at disinformation@michigan.gov. It's a great way for us to get the information in, and we can do an investigation, and if we think there might be some larger issues involved, we refer it to the Attorney General.
we have another question for Dana Nessel. Our concern lies with voter intimidation, especially in Detroit. The amount of election deniers who are in the past can disrupt the voting process. And I want to know about the security of ballot boxes and the ability of those less mobile to vote.
Well, here is the great news. Because of the great work that was done by voters all around the state of Michigan, both in terms of propositions that were passed, voter initiatives that were passed in 2018 and again in 2022, it's easier than ever for people to cast their ballot. Not only, of course, do we have no reason absentee voting, but we also have 9 days of early voting. And so, you know, you got to try to not vote if it's something that you're interested in doing. When you talk about voter intimidation, again, I think it's a lot harder if people feel as though there could be something going on at the polls on election day, which we have very, very rarely seen. We're always prepared for it. We almost never actually see it. And in fact, let me talk about one incident that my staff, everybody in my office is on alert on election day, and we are ready to be dispatched to any place where we think there's trouble, along with Michigan State Police and many others. And we went out, we got one such alert that there were trouble in the polls out in Warren, Michigan, and Macomb County in 2020. My special agents went to the scene immediately, and when they got there, there were a number of Trump supporters on one side, Biden supporters on the other, but they were all singing God Bless America together. So I was like, this doesn't seem like a problem to me. And I thought it was actually a very joyful occasion. But that being the case, when you talk about voter intimidation, again, you have the ability to vote right from your house. You have the ability to take your absentee ballot and deposit it, you know, right into a receptacle on, you know, for how many days, Michael? For 40 days, right? At your convenience, at your leisure. And, you know, and of course, you know, I certainly am not going to dissuade people from voting on election day. I'd like to vote on election day. It's just, even though there's all these other ways to vote, I still really enjoy it. And so I vote in person on election day most of the time. So, you know, I would say there is very little reason anymore for, I think, people to feel that sense of intimidation, because I would suggest that very few people would know what's going on in the privacy of your own home. But with that, we take it very, very seriously. And again, that is why we are always prepared. And in the event that we hear about or we see, and is that a little hard? Because I will take that. In the event that we hear of anything like that, you know, then we act immediately. And we work with the Michigan Department of State and with many others in law enforcement to investigate that. And if we find evidence that there is voter intimidation, then, you know, we prosecute those cases. We just have had very, very few incidences of that. But again, there's so many opportunities to vote and so many different ways to vote. I hope that for anybody who has felt that at any time in the past, they know that there's probably very little reason for them to be worried about that in the future.
This isn't addressed to anyone in particular, so you let me know who's going to answer it. There are a lot of claims that immigrants are brought into Michigan for political reasons. Can you explain if undocumented immigrants are being brought into Michigan and what process we have in place to prevent non-citizens from voting? I would assume the Secretary of State's office wants to tackle that one.
Well, my parents came to this state as immigrants, and I think our immigration system overall is great. It's a benefit to all of us. Everyone here, I assume, unless you come from the Native American background, is an immigrant at some level. We've all been strengthened by that. Of course, we can only have elections where U.S. citizens vote in this state, and that's a good thing. It's secure, and it makes sure that our policy is being decided by fellow Americans. As I explained before, if you're a Michigan citizen, most likely you've been registered through getting your driver's license at our department. So you have to give some information showing your legal status when you get a driver's license. And if it shows that you're not a U.S. citizen, you don't get registered. Additionally, if for whatever reason you fill out one of those forms on the campus registering to vote and you don't have your driver's license or your social security number, then you have to provide a proof of identity and a proof of residency to even cast a ballot. So we have multiple steps of security, safeguarding the system, which I think make it extremely secure and give all of us a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I think, and one thing that's important to it is to understand that nothing happens in a vacuum. So in order to register, you have to register an address. And that information is going to go into the system, and it's going to cross the eyes of a human being. And so either we're going to receive a number of mail applications with one or two addresses multiple times, or they're going to come into our inboxes. This is a term our election officials would use, where we would begin to see this massive amount of registrations at obscure addresses, right? So this is one of the beautiful things about having a very decentralized system like we do in Michigan, right? There are 1,540 local clerks who are all doing voter registration for their little piece of Michigan. Right? In Canton, we have 36 square miles, 6 by 6. The township is going to be 3 by 6, okay? So you begin to start noticing those things, and you begin to start talking to each other, and you begin to run these things through what we would call basically the reasonableness test. So what is going on? I've noticed I just received 50 brand new voter registrations, all at the same address. I think I might need to call the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. This kind of a claim would only make sense if you didn't understand the nuts and bolts. It's essentially the kind of claim you might hear about a vehicle by somebody who's not a mechanic or an engineer. If you understand the systems in place, you probably wouldn't make that claim necessarily, because it's virtually impossible to go by undetected. On top of that, in order to meet the federal identification requirements, you have to provide the last four of Social Security or a driver's license, or you have to physically show up on election day and provide identification. And that's not photo ID, it's a different identification requirement for federal mail-in registration. And so each one of those individuals would be flagged. They're flagged in the electronic poll book. They're flagged in the voter registration system. They want to apply for an absentee ballot. So the number of checks and balances in this process make what could be a statistically insignificant risk of something occurring. Again, a potential. Sure, there's a non-zero chance that a person who is not a U.S. citizen could cast a ballot. But what we don't necessarily see would be validity to that claim. Somehow there are, as a large-scale operation, individuals who are doing that, and that it's organized, because again, it will go back to that. Very easy, behind you. We find any anomaly in the system, we find very quickly. And we look for prosecution.
Yeah, and I would say this, I would really, in terms of non-citizens voting, I would very much compare it to the claim that Jan Brady made about her boyfriend, George Glass. She can say that she has a boyfriend, George Glass, but nobody's ever seen him. Nobody can identify him. Nobody's ever met him. Nobody can prove that he exists. It's very similar, I see, with these claims. Am I the oldest one here? Does everyone, this man Here's the thing. You hear the claim, there are all of these non-citizens that are voting, but there is no evidence to substantiate that whatsoever. And if there was, we would investigate it and we would absolutely prosecute it. And that's why it was so important for me to indicate to everybody, the one time I've ever seen it now, again, being in office from the 2018 election cycle, because I took office January 1st, 2019, so any of those investigations came to us. Then again, the 2020 cycle and the 2022 cycle. And again, only ever saw it once. That person was caught, that person was prosecuted. So when you talk about the frequency of which it happens, that's what we've seen. And if we did have any actual evidence of this, we 100% would pursue it, and we would pursue it vigorously. We just haven't seen it, and when we do hear those rumors out there, no one can ever point to a specific person in a specific place at a specific time, ever. So I think it's important that people know that.
What verification is in place to make sure there is not a duplicate vote by a college student? Example, university student gets an absentee ballot at their home address, then registers on campus and votes there. Do the voter records catch that? Do the sites talk?
So I'm sure the Deputy SOS can go in a little bit into detail about that, but one of the cool things about Michigan is we are the pioneering state of motor voter. And that was really controversial in the 1970s when the state took on voter registration. Gogo wrote a really cool op-ed about it a couple of months ago. If you go online and Google it, you can read it. But Richard, the Attorney General for the state of Michigan had this great idea that we could register voters at the Bureau of Election, or at the DMV essentially. And we fought it, the local clerks, because we don't like giving up power, even if it makes sense. But in the end, it did make sense, because at that time, you didn't have a voter registration database for the state of Michigan. We have 1,540 voter registration databases for the state of Michigan. And you'd have to register in one, notify your clerk when you moved from Canton to Westland, register there separately. You wouldn't travel with you when you changed your driver's license. It made no sense. Luckily, also, we invented the internet. So when the internet was invented and you have an older voter, you came up with what we call the qualified voter file. Clerks would call it QVF for short, qualified voter file. There is an electronic record of every single voter. It's attached to, if you have a driver's license, your driver's license number. It is impossible for Michael Segrist, attached to my driver's license, to be registered in two locations at the exact same time, even if I register on election day, even if I had an absentee ballot sent back to me. Because what would happen is, let's say I voted my absentee ballot, and let's say I waited till election day, which is great for her office because now I've just proved intent for my desire to commit fraud. I wait till election day. I submit my absentee ballot on election day, then I register, let's say, in Ann Arbor, because I'm like a go-go, I studied hard, I got a new move out of my work. And then I try to cast my ballot there. The minute I register in Ann Arbor, that ballot is no longer live. It's no longer active, and when the clerk in Canton scans that ballot, it indicates that that voter is no longer there. And that happens frequently because people move, right? We have a constitutional right to move. We live busy lives. We are in constant state, not just college kids, right? Everybody moves. And so that can be a challenge. Again, if you request an absentee ballot, as a Michigan citizen, you have the right to remain and to vote at your previous address for 60 days. I would recommend not registering at your new voting location if you already returned your absentee ballot, because guess what will happen? That ballot will no longer be valid, and you will be registered when you register at your new address, and you will need to obtain a new absentee ballot. I'm telling you right now, an unverified absentee ballot that has been returned is just a piece of paper until a Republican and a Democrat decide that it's valid for tabulation.
How did the issue in St. Clair Shores happen so that it doesn't happen in other communities? And for those that don't know, you'll have to explain what the issue in St. Clair Shores is. Ooh, like that. Oh, yes, again.
So I'm a lawyer, and I'm sitting next to my lawyer. So I'm not going to go too much into the details on that because it's still under investigation. But I will say that we had an issue where someone double voted. They returned an absentee ballot and then showed up on election day and cast a ballot. And that is illegal. Fortunately, because of the system that we have in place, we caught it. And that's as by design, and so we're now investigating to make sure that doesn't happen again. But we have really good safeguards, and I'm pretty confident about this in the future. I will say that the St. Clair Shores situation is unique because it just usually, it's not something that happens that frequently, so when it does happen, it gets everyone's attention.
Well, I think it's important though that people understand exactly when somebody has already cast their absentee ballot and now they go in to vote on election day. Boy, talk about your red flag. I would say it's like a red banner that comes up in the qualified voter file computer, right? I mean, you guys have seen it in person. I've only seen pictures of it, but it's gigantic. And it flashes up there, and it warns that election worker that that person's ballot has already been cast. And now, and again, you guys are the elections experts, but, you know, my understanding is that in the past, before we had early voting and everything, you had the opportunity to say, do you want to spoil your absentee ballot? And there were times, right, and still you can do this in a certain amount of time in advance of the election. Let's say you have a candidate that you voted for, and now that person has withdrawn, right? They're no longer actively pursuing that office. Or you have a situation where last minute something came up, and you received new information about a candidate, and you no longer want to vote for them, or you do really want to vote for them because of it. You know, time was you could go in on election day and say, I want to spoil my absentee ballot, and I want a new ballot. And that was fine. Now, because of early voting and because of the pre-processing that you're allowed to do, it's, what is it, like 2 Fridays before or something that you have. You can still do it, but you can't do it on election day anymore. But what happens is you have this gigantic message that will pop up immediately on the screen saying, this person already voted, and that person is supposed to get turned away, and the election worker has to say, I'm sorry, you already voted. And then what frequently happens, and again, I hope that Michael will clarify this if I'm misrepresenting anything, but generally speaking, it's up to you or one of your deputies then to talk to that voter if they're still insisting on voting and saying, here is a picture of the back of your absentee ballot, and here's your signature, and you already voted. Congratulations, you get your I voted sticker, but you're not going to be able to cast another ballot. And in the event that anything goes wrong at that local level, then once you get to the county level, the county clerk will detect it, and that's what happened in Macomb County. Am I misrepresenting anything, guys?
Only one other thing.
Okay.
So even if we're not informed by the local clerk or the county clerk, we're still going to see it in our system after the whole entire canvas is done for the whole entire state. So there, and the bright warning red screen is pretty apparent to everyone who sees it, as the Attorney General said. So that is a really great safeguard as well.
So who here has worked in election in Canton Township and been trained by me? Did I cover this in training?
Yeah.
Did I cover it exhaustively in training?
Does it work?
Right?
Yes.
It works.
Because we talk about the sanctity of elections as one person, one vote. And it is fundamentally important. One of the biggest security features of the Michigan election system, but also a potential vulnerability, is the fact that it is run by the citizens of the state of Michigan. We have 300 people who work the elections in Canton Township. What's fantastic about that is it's you. It's your neighbors. It's the people who you interact with on a regular basis. And we team them up into bipartisan teams, and they suspiciously watch each other the entire time, assuming that the other person is ruining the country. Everything would be amazing if their side wins and the other side loses, right? All the problems go away. That's what we tell ourselves as partisans, right? No, but we put them in those teams to make sure that this very open, very transparent process is as secure as possible. One of the downsides to having such an open process that is human and run by people is that accidents happen. Because you don't have professionals running these precincts. One of the benefits of that is they don't know enough to be dangerous. But they can still make mistakes. And that's the problem there. So in this scenario, the poll book has to be able to allow for the issuance of a ballot for an individual who has returned an absentee ballot, because everybody has the right to vote a provisional ballot under federal law, right? HAVA allows anybody to vote a provisional ballot. And that's for the 2020 election, or the 2000 election. Every time we have an election that is typically controversial for some reason or another, you see a reform come out of that. One of them is the provisional ballot, which may or may not go into the tabulator and be counted depending on the circumstances. But you still have to have that. A provisional ballot is essentially like if there's something wrong with me as a voter, right? Not as a person, I'm still valid, I'm a valid human. But maybe I'm not registered, or my registration got knocked out of the system. Maybe I'm in the wrong location. For whatever reason, if there's an error on behalf of an election and administrator, no person should ever be turned away from the polls, ever. So in the scenario that somebody says, I want to display my ballot, I don't remember voting absentee, the appropriate answer would be like, well, no, I see the ballot number 215 was tabulated in your name. You can have my vote sticker, or, thank you very much. Call the clerk if you're upset. If they refuse to leave, they should be given a provisional ballot. They can vote the ballot. You can issue them a provisional ballot in the system, but that would be an envelope ballot that would not go in the tabulator. They would sign that. That would be reviewed by me. If there was some type of reason why, oh no, we did make a mistake. They never did vote an absentee ballot. We would have that ballot. The chain of custody has been maintained. It's evidence, right? All ballots are evidence of an election. That's why it's important they're on paper. Chain of custody has been maintained. We will tabulate that ballot before canvass so that voters' vote counts. What invariably we find is, especially because in this election, if you're a Canton resident in one section of Canton, you may have voted in 5 elections this year. We had a special election in January, special primary in January, we had a presidential election in February, we had a special in, I don't even remember anymore, it's April maybe, we had the primary in August, and now we're coming up on our 5th election. And so you may not remember. In fact, somebody said, my wife just got her November ballot, and I was like, that's not possible, because we haven't heard it yet. It's not possible. Certain that his wife had gotten one. So she brought that ballot in. It was a February ballot. There's only one contest on it, right? It's a completely different ballot. But our brains aren't necessarily the best computers all the time, right? We can very quickly sometimes make assumptions about things. It was a February ballot. It wasn't a November ballot. But people will invariably vote an absentee ballot and forget about it. And they show up on election day. And if this is somebody who's been paying attention for the last 4 years, they might be suspicious. They might not trust. They trust themselves. They don't trust me. They don't trust the poll worker. They don't trust the process. And so it's important that that poll worker, A, pay attention to the machine when it tells them do not issue a ballot, and it says that very clearly. But additionally, is firm and says, no, you're not going to get a ballot from me today. And then reaches out to an election official. And I do train the inspectors that under no circumstances do they issue somebody a ballot who has that status. If it involves calling law enforcement, we call law enforcement. We do not allow people to bully their way into a second ballot. Plain and simple.
This is for the Secretary of State. What have you done and what have you not done or are doing to prevent AI from interfering with voting machines? New question.
Use the mic.
Yeah, I was pondering the answer too, so thank you for it. It's always good to have a little pause when you're contemplating how to answer these questions. In terms of AI, our actual voting systems, in terms of the tabulator, in terms of the qualified voter file, and the poll books, those are all secure and they don't interface with artificial intelligence. So just want to ensure that the actual mechanical processes for voting are completely secure. But AI can be used, and we have seen it used in this election cycle, to improperly influence people's votes. We saw during the presidential primary in New Hampshire that someone put out a robocall reporting to be from President Biden, discouraging people from voting. We've seen this now become a factor in American political life. So what we've done in Michigan with our legislative partners, we've passed some bills in the state legislature to make it clear that, one, if you use AI in any political advertisement, you have to disclose it, and you have to disclose it clearly to the voters so that they see and know that this is an AI-generated political ad. Two, if you're doing it to misinform and dissuade and give disinformation to a voter, that's illegal, and we have clear penalties on the books to ensure that people can be held accountable for that. So we're really trying to keep up with the new innovations that we see in our technology, but we also need the federal government to step up. The federal government to this point has done nothing to help the states combat this disinformation threat through artificial intelligence. We also need our social media companies. I was in Washington, D.C. in February for the National Association of Secretaries of State Conference, and we had representatives from all the major social media companies, and we urged them to take more appropriate and proactive steps to ensure that there isn't AI being used to dissuade voters from casting votes as they would want and not giving them false information. So this is really something, one, that I think on the Michigan level we've done our part. We need the federal government and social media companies to step up and do their part as well.
I'm sorry, that was on the machines, not anything else. What are you doing to prevent AI from attacking the machines? That was my question. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear.
So I think what I try to answer with your question, and then if I'm not being clear, I want to be, is that our systems are not attached to any type of portal that would allow them to be interfered with artificial intelligence. So our voting machines, our tabulators are not connected to the internet. The QVF has multiple layers of security that don't allow it to interact with outside technologies. Same thing with the poll book. So it's completely cut off from any ability for it to be interacting with artificial intelligence.
Thank you.
Mike, could you explain the testing system
Yes.
work and the public testing system so that everyone understands that?
First I'll explain why that's not a concern of mine, and then you can decide if that's not a concern of yours. I see some of my colleagues, some clerks here from Oakland County. What machine company do you use in Oakland County? You use Hart Intercivic, which is based out of Texas. We use Dominion in Wayne County, right? Two different vendors, two completely different programming sets, two of the largest counties in the state of Michigan. There's a third vendor in the state of Michigan called ES&S. They use a completely different set of programming. That's just the style of programming. That's the type of device itself. You have 83 counties in the state of Michigan that are responsible for producing that programming. You've already got a decentralization of the actual creation of the programming itself. Then you have a series of chain of custody in who designs that, which is also done on an air-gapped computer. It is delivered to the local election official, and there are 1,600 or 1,540 of them, using 3 different vendors, programmed by 83 different counties. So like now we start talking about from a statistics standpoint, you've created almost an impossible scenario to right there, just in the complete decentralization of the process, to actually systematically change the results of an election if you were somehow to overcome the air gap and chain of custody, right? And then that is then tested in what we call a preliminary logic and accuracy test, which is where you run every scenario through each one of the tabulators. That is done. Then you have a public logic and accuracy test, which you do it and invite the public to. Nobody comes, because it's super boring. But anyway, I do know the Secretary of State's office has currently been piloting with individuals to look at alternatives and more nuanced ways to do a more robust logic and accuracy test as well, to help us dig deeper, even further into it. But more importantly, essentially, the logic and accuracy is going to tell us if there's an error in how the machine is reading the ballot itself. Anybody here who's ever worked an election, a ballot from Precinct 1, will that go into a tabulator from Precinct 2? No. No, under any circumstances, because the machine can't read it. right? So now you've got further decentralization. Canton Township is one of 1,540 jurisdictions, and we've got 33 precincts with 34 ballot styles. Because unfortunately, the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission decided to do a precinct split and waste Canton taxpayer money because they're using census data instead of school district data. Someone to talk to them next time they redraw those lines. But anyway, so now you've got a decentralization further in Canton Township into 34 individual ballot styles, each one programmed a certain way. So, now, diminishing returns. If you're trying to change the outcome of an election, and you've somehow overcome an air gap in the program, you've somehow overcome an air gap in the tabulator equipment, which is sealed and secured by bipartisan individuals, you've had maintained chain of custody. The programming has been maintained chain of custody. The programming has been tested. There's 3 different individual vendors. There's 83 different individual institutions creating the programming. They're different than the individuals who are testing the programming, and the programming is being tested in public. And then you maintain chain of custody on election day. And then in that process, that equipment is being locked for all 8 hours of early voting, all 13 hours of election day. And you're watching it the entire time you're doing your absent voter counting board, and you've got one Republican and one Democrat at least, suspiciously watching each other the entire time. How on earth? First of all, if you have $15,000 or $20,000 and you want to change the outcome of an election, dear God, that is not the way to do it. Go spend it on advertising for the candidate of your choice. Diminishing returns, it's definitely prosecutable, and it's not worth the bang for the buck. And you can't actually change it. And at the end of the day, we would see, oh my gosh, one of these things is not like the other. We have this bizarre precinct that has either more ballots cast than there are voters in the tabulator, a substantial shift, and they actually have software now that can detect standard deviation migrations of election results from what you would reasonably expect. And that's different for every community, right? Outcomes of election are different from every community, but you start looking for those. It would be very easily detected. Very easily detected, and then you've got the evidence. And luckily, we sent the election results at the end of the night to the probate court, to the county clerk, and the local clerk has it. So if anything happens to the election results from all 3 of them, you've got 3 separate, distinct chains of custody that have been maintained, signed by one Republican and one Democrat, and you still got chain of custody on the paper ballots. You can then go through and do a hand audit of that precinct, because that's probably all you can do, because the program of precinct 1 is different from the program of precinct 2. That's why I'm not concerned about AI alternate voting machines.
Just so that it's clear to everybody, and if I can ask you guys, when you do the public testing of the machines, is it where you have the ballots filled out so that everybody can see how they're filled out? X number of votes for candidate A, X number of votes for candidate B, and then you run it through the tabulator to show that in effect, it casts the tabulator shows the exact number of people who voted for A or B, just as the paper ballots have. Do I have that right?
Yes. We also test for other scenarios too. We're going to make sure if somebody votes straight party Democratic but decides to cross over in one race, that tabulates correctly as well. So we want to make sure the tabulator will overwrite the straight party if that's the voter's choice. We want to make sure that the tabulator will detect an overvote, where if it says vote for not more than 1, we vote for 2, and we want to make sure we catch that. And in that scenario, the result should be 0 in that race. So we're testing the logic of the machine. And the machine is super simple. It's complicated for me because I'm not a programmer, but a programmer will do it. It's super simple. Because it's essentially a digital scanner that just is reading yes or no. It's a Scantron reading test scores, essentially, right? It's just a little different test. And there's no right answer unless you're a partisan, in which case you knew the answer before the election even happened. But anyway, so you're looking for all of those things. You're also testing, too, because there's something called an ambiguous mark. Like, our machines are tested. If it's below 5% of the oval filled out, nothing should register. If it's between 5% and 20%, that should indicate something, at which point the voter will be notified. Hey, this isn't ignored, but this isn't a vote. You've got work to do if you intended this to be a vote. And that's how we stop pen rests from causing involuntary overvotes. So we're testing In one race with 3 candidates, we're probably testing 7 scenarios, and that's each race. And then each race on the ballot gets tested as well.
And so I would just encourage people, if you have questions about it, you get to actually go to this event where that machine is tested, and you can look at everything for yourself. So it's not exactly a covert, secretive process. It's all open to the public, and it's as transparent as any system anywhere in the world.
Wow, that was some answer. We've managed to ask 7 questions in about 40 minutes, and I have 7 unanswered questions. So obviously we're not going to get to all of them. I will keep the cards of the questions that weren't answered and try to get them to the individuals, and hopefully that information will get out. But this one I found very interesting, as I used to run group homes. There is an owner of a group home, adult men, developmentally disabled, who want their vote registration canceled. This has been denied. New owner is calling families of clients to ask them to sign an affidavit having them removed from the voting rolls. Our mother stays there and is pressured. Should this be reported, and to what agency?
I think we'll start with it. I'll close it out.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the things that's really important to remember is that no one should be able to cancel your voter registration but you. And this is it's an extremely important safeguard because we can have differences. Someone can make an allegation against you, and that can be false. We know that people who live in nursing homes, some of them are developmentally disabled, and some of them aren't. It's really up to the voter to decide. If there is a more serious issue, of course, contact your clerk, and then we can begin an investigation.
I will just say that I don't want to say that there is never a time where you have some sort of a home like that, a nursing home or some other assisted facility where there are allegations that an individual has in some way, shape, or form pressured the person to fill out the ballot a certain way. Again, these are they are eligible voters, but they are people that maybe because of a cognitive decline are a little bit more susceptible to somebody influencing them. But in those cases, we have investigated, and there is one case that we did prosecute. And I'm trying to think, it was either Oakland or Macomb, I'd have to look it up. But we found an individual who worked at the home, and it was our belief that she was pressuring these particular individuals who probably, from a cognitive standpoint, were no longer in a place where they could make up their own minds about how to vote. And we heard about it. It was referred to our office. We investigated it, and we prosecuted it, and that lady went to jail. So again, I mean, are there times from a systemic standpoint where, things like that could happen? Yes, but we're talking not en masse. And when we find out about it, we vigorously investigate and prosecute those cases. But I agree with we're seeing more and more where people are sending an Excel sheet to a local clerk and saying, oh, all of these people should be removed from the voting files because they have another address. So you got to remove them. And, then come to find out, and I'm sure you've seen this, Michael, but, come to find out, well, yeah, that person had 2 different addresses because they're a college kid, and they have 2 different addresses. It doesn't mean they're voting in 2 different places, as Michael explained. You're allowed to have 2 different addresses. You could have a place up north. And so maybe you have an address up there, and you have an address, somewhere in the southeastern Michigan area. That's not illegal. They have 2 different addresses, but if you tried to vote twice, you would be caught. We know people who are snowbirds. They have a home here, and maybe they have a place in Florida. That's not illegal. It doesn't mean you get removed from your opportunity to decide to vote in one place or the other. And people serve in the military, right? Which means they have an address here in Michigan, they're serving elsewhere in the country or abroad. You don't automatically get removed from your ability to be able to cast a ballot because of that. And that's why there is a more arduous process that you have to go through to remove somebody from, what's the qualified voter file, right? Okay. But I think it's important because we hear these rumors like, oh, look how bloated these voter rolls are. These people they've moved, they have other addresses. Well, maybe they moved, or maybe they didn't. But just because they moved doesn't mean that they are voting multiple times. You have to go through multiple additional steps, meaning that somebody has to request an absentee ballot in their name. That absentee ballot has to be sent out to them. Then somebody has to cast that ballot. And as we've indicated before, we have so many different ways to catch people if they do that. The other thing that we've seen is people, suggesting, look at all these people who are still on the rolls and they shouldn't be. And then you find out that somebody got that list from like 3 years ago. And it's been updated a bazillion times, because doesn't it get updated every day? Or how many times? Every day it's updated.
Right now.
Right.
It's constantly being
So
updated.
every day it's being updated. So just because somebody had a list from 3 years ago doesn't mean that's what the list looks like right now. And so it's important to know that when you hear like, oh, look at all these extra voters that are on this file, doesn't mean that there is any voting fraud occurring for multiple reasons. And if we saw it, we would catch it and we would prosecute it.
I'm just trying to issue spot because I believe the question was that the person who asked this mother resides at this home, and they believe
I
that.
think that right. It's my question. The owner of the group home has been contacting this particular mother, who I'm already communicating with, because the gentleman moved out of our jurisdiction, and so we're in the process of getting that updated. But he has repeatedly come and left me voicemails, left me affidavits saying these people need to be removed. They don't know what a ballot is. They don't have a signature. And then the last time he came in about this woman's son, he informed me that he owns the group home. And there you have it.
So what we've essentially got here is, it sounds like the individual owner of a group home is attempting to submit Section 512 affidavits challenging the eligibility of individuals who have a cognitive disability, which is definitely against the law. That is definitely a crime. First of all, under Section 512, you can only challenge a voter that they are ineligible to vote. And eligibility in Michigan law is very clearly defined. There is no cognitive test to be a registered voter. There is no cognitive test to be a registered voter. And so challenging somebody on false information under Section 512, the last sentence of that, to make a challenge without good faith is a misdemeanor under the state law, under Section 512. If I were the clerk in that jurisdiction, I would go to my local police department, I would submit a police report, I would refer that to the Secretary of State's office, and I would probably get to her office as well. And people who submit those 512 affidavits need to understand that, because they will routinely challenge military voters on accident. They will challenge people who live in Michigan part-time or another state part-time, and they need to know when they make those challenges that they are potentially committing a crime if they actually submit a successful affidavit that is notarized on paper.
Yeah, I just want to, follow up on that, because I think ultimately the main concern that people have is that, okay, if someone is on the rolls, even if they don't request a ballot, can somebody request a ballot for them and submit it? There are so many different steps that you have to take to get a ballot, even if you're on the rolls. When you come to our office and get a driver's license, we take your signature. That's not just for, on the face of your driver's license. It's also to keep on our database in the QVF, so that if you request an absentee ballot, it's compared to that signature, and it verifies that you are who you say you are. And additionally, if you go in person to get an absentee ballot, to vote on election day or vote early, if you have a driver's license on your person, you have to present that driver's license to the election official there to verify your identity. If for whatever reason, say you were living with your friend or someone else or your spouse, and when you're both driving to the location, one of you, because you're not driving, didn't bring your license with you, which happens, you don't want to have to go back home and grab your driver's license. You can fill out an affidavit attesting under perjury that you are who you say you are. And that happens in every single county in the state, all 83 counties. But it doesn't happen that often either. Most people just use their driver's license. So we have a number of different safeguards that even if somebody is on the rolls as an eligible voter, they're not going to cast a ballot. Like someone is not going to cast a ballot on their behalf.
Well, our town hall time has come to an end. I want to thank the speakers, the audience, the League of Women Voters, members who collected the ballots. I just came back from New York with my grandsons, and the three things we went to see. We went to the Statue of Liberty, we went to Ellis Island, and we went to the 9/11 Memorial Site. It is important to me that my children and grandchildren know how important voting is. So all of you, I'm challenging you to talk to your children and grandchildren, make sure they're registered to vote. I'm harassing one grandchild in particular who hasn't switched his voting registration yet. Democracy is important, and we all need to defend democracy. Thank you.